And welcome. My name is Samantha Sauer, and I am the Illinois College Archivist with the Kalath Al-Habtoor Archives, curator of the Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum, and an assistant professor of history. In this role, I get to manage our campus museum, archives, and special collections, and I also get to welcome you to our Convocation program tonight, Speak Out and Make Your Vote Count, Constitution Day 2020. Tonight, we're going to be exploring our campus and community resources and learning more about the value of your vote. Before we begin, I do have just a couple of comments to get us started. So this virtual program is being recorded and will be shared with participants at a later date. Again, please make sure that your audio and video are muted. Throughout our program, we have enabled the chat feature, however, so if you have any questions for any of our panelists tonight as we share information and insights, please do feel free to use the chat feature and add your comments and questions throughout. We've saved time at the end of our program to have some question and answer and discussion. If you do run into any technical hiccups or difficulties, one of our panelists, Ryan Flynn, is on standby to help out and maybe address some of those technical hiccups. So just use the chat feature and you can private message Ryan Flynn, and hopefully we can get any issues resolved. So again, welcome to our Convocation program tonight. Our goal is to explore campus and community resources and again, learn more about the value of your vote. So I'm joined by two campus colleagues, Dane Wendell, an assistant professor of political science here at Illinois College. Professor Wendell teaches classes on the American government, political psychology, and political behavior. And this semester, he's also teaching a course on campaigns and elections. We're also joined by Ryan Flynn, Illinois College's Director of Community Engaged Learning. He works with faculty to plan community engagement course projects, coordinates the alternative spring break experience, and serves as a resource for student organizations as they conduct service work in our community. When we consider broadly some of the challenges facing our country today, including systemic racism, understanding how our government works, our government framework, our Constitution, and how it's an evolving document and reflects and meets the needs and demands of our nation is crucial. This is why the right to vote, as well as the ability and access to do so, is key. We're going to begin our program with a brief overview of Constitution Day and highlight some of our campus resources. And again, just as a reminder, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to use the chat feature. Okay. So what is Constitution Day? Well, Constitution Day is also known as Citizenship Day. This day is observed each year on September 17th to commemorate the signing of the Constitution. The Constitution was originally signed on September 17th, 1787. In 1937, 150 years after that original signing, Congress commissioned this painting, which might look a little familiar. It's featured in a lot of textbooks. The painting was commissioned by Howard Chandler Christie, and Christie called upon period portraits to imagine the delegates as for inspiration and accuracy. But what is the Constitution? Well, with those stirring first words, we the people, the U.S. Constitution uniquely places power in the hands of the people. The U.S. Constitution is the fundamental framework of America's system of government and separates the government into three branches: the legislative branch, which makes the laws, the executive branch, which executes the laws, and the judicial branch, which interprets the laws. The legislative branch is made up of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, the Constitution was signed in 1787 and then ratified in 1789. The United States has changed a lot since 1789. In fact, since 1789, the U.S. Constitution has been amended 27 times, and these amendments reflect our changing nation. Many of these amendments address expanding civil rights and civil rights protections. This is why it's important to be an active citizen and utilize your voice your vote to help continue an ongoing national conversation. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the U.S. Constitution or Constitution Day, we recommend checking out the National Constitution Center. Now, the center itself is located in Philadelphia, but their website is accessible tonight, and you can explore it. The center is located very close to Independence Hall, pictured on the bottom right, where the U.S. Constitution was originally signed. It's also very close to the current home of the Liberty Bell, also pictured on the bottom right. The center has an active social media presence, including an active Instagram page. Now, another resource where you can explore and understand more about the U.S. Constitution is in the popular Broadway musical, Hamilton. A filmed version of the stage musical was released earlier in 2020 and is available on the platform Disney+. But besides this website and besides Hamilton, there are resources right here on Illinois College's campus that might be of interest if you're curious in exploring these topics further. For example, you could enroll in a class about the U.S. government, or pre-law, or any of our political science or history courses. And if you're interested in learning more about the legislative process, or Congress, Illinois College happens to be home to an incredibly unique museum, the Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum. The Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum is named for the late Congressman Paul Finley. Paul Finley was a 1943 graduate of Illinois College, and you can see a 1943 graduate photo of young Paul on the bottom left. Congressman Finley served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1961 to 1983. Finley represented the 20th District of Illinois. And during his 22 years in office, Finley helped craft a range of legislation. Now, the museum was established in 2011 to collect, preserve, and make available manuscripts, documents, and artifacts related to the life and career of Paul Finley. Since 2011, the museum has served as an active learning laboratory for the IC campus community. The museum hosts classes, community visitors, Illinois College interns, student workers. The museum also supports things like student-faculty research, independent study, independent research, and welcomes scholars from near and far. Pictured on the slide are some museum moments from fall 2019, so you might recognize a few familiar campus faces. Now, the museum's collection, the artifacts, documents, and materials housed within reflect material related to Finley's life and career. They reflect his interest in Abraham Lincoln and historic preservation, as well as Finley's involvement in the quest for universal human rights and peace and justice in the Middle East. In fact, the title for our program tonight, Speak Out and Make Your Vote Count, is actually inspired by two of Congressman Finley's own books, Speaking Out and They Dare to Speak Out, both works which encourage activism and moving forward to try and make a difference in the world. Now, as a U.S. representative, Finley served 11 terms in office, running for re-election every 2 years. As a result, some of the unique materials in the museum's collection reflect that emphasis on campaigning. Collection materials include content related to voter engagement, connecting and corresponding with constituents, as well as campaign memorabilia. Everything from buttons to hats to neckties, signs, posters, and more. Now, the museum focuses on utilizing unique historic artifacts, documents, photographs, and other primary sources to enrich the curriculum and support you, our students. However, less than 1% of the museum's collection is actually ever on display in the museum's gallery at any time. Most of the collection is housed in museum storage or located in the Kalath Al-Habtoor archives on the lower level of Shiwi Library. This is available for research. The Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum is an award-winning museum, and it's a member of the Association of Centers for the Study of Congress, alongside institutions such as the Robert Dole Institute for Politics and the Library of Congress. The museum is also an active member of the Illinois Association of Museums. So pictured on your screen are some images of the current museum gallery displays, as well as some exciting storage boxes. Here's a look at just a few other materials in the Finley collection. Now the museum's collection, like I said, is housed in museum storage as well as in the Calath Alhaptor archives and is available to you as Illinois College students and scholars from near and far. But the museum's reach isn't limited to just the walls of a museum gallery or inside an archive storage area. The museum engages our campus and community through educational, public, and outreach programs. Pictured here are just a few recent programs that the Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum has planned and implemented here at Illinois College. These public programs focus on history, museum collections, but most importantly, on the power and importance of storytelling and connecting us with these stories. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the museum, feel free to explore its website and social media. This fall, to follow campus health and safety guidelines, as well as to practice good social distancing, the museum gallery is open by appointment only. Now, another resource that Illinois College is home to this fall, besides the Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum, is a special pop-up exhibit from the National Archives. This pop-up exhibit observes and celebrates the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Now, the ratification of the 19th Amendment was a landmark moment in American history that dramatically changed our electorate. It enshrined in the United States Constitution fuller citizenship for women and a more expansive democracy for our nation. This pop-up display contains simple messages about the expansion of the vote to millions of women before and after the 19th Amendment and its impact today. The 19th Amendment celebrated its 100th anniversary in August 2020, and Illinois College is hosting this temporary exhibit this fall. Currently, it's on display in the Kirby Learning Center Rotunda. So, we've overviewed material about the special pop-up display, the Paul Finley Congressional Office Museum, as well as a little bit about the history of Constitution Day and the Constitution itself. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And in a moment, we're going to hear from my fellow panelist, Professor Dane Wendell. Professor Wendell?
I'm here. Sorry, I have a lot of things to say in the chat room right now. I think
Oh
we're ready to go.
I'm excited. Well, over to you.
Sam, it's interesting. I was talking to some of my students, and they seem to be under the impression that when you're done with that Lincoln bench, I'm allowed to take it home. Can you confirm or deny?
Yeah, you know, we've been talking about some coordinating throw pillows to match your background there. And yeah, Abraham Lincoln's historic sofa is heavy, but looking for, no, it's not leaving the museum gallery.
Okay. All right. So you're saying there's a chance. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. What I've got for you all today is a presentation that I wrote that talks a little bit about what's going on in the 2020 election, and also gives you all some details about how political scientists think about this election and what some of the big factors are. And so my plan here is to pull this up and share this, and then we can get going. So just give me a quick second here. Okay. All right, and I think we are good to go. Election is
there
to
it
understand
is.
To which political party do they feel closest. Partisanship is a kind of psychological and emotional connection to a party. People who self-identify as Republicans or who lean Republicans have a very high predictability of voting for Republicans. Partisans often feel that their party speaks for them and better represents their views on policy. So on the one hand, maybe this doesn't sound that interesting. I mean, is it all that surprising that someone who identifies as a Republican is also going to choose the Republican candidate for president? Maybe that's not surprising, but here's what makes partisanship so interesting. Partisanship is robust and durable. Most people, most of the time, do not change their partisanship. So people are actually less persuadable than you might think from the other side's perspective. New information, new leadership, new candidates, new issues, they actually only rarely change people's partisan affiliations. So what's interesting about a person who says they're Republican today is that they're likely going to be a Republican for decades. Here's some examples of this robustness. 90% of those who supported Republican Mitt Romney in 2012 also supported Trump 4 years later in 2016, 9 and 10 of them. That's pretty striking because those two candidates are profoundly different candidates. Arguably, they shouldn't even belong in the same political party together. About 94% of those who supported Trump in 2016 are planning to support him again in 2020. 94%, that's 19 out of 20 Trump supporters are not changing their minds moving into 2020. Same thing with the Democrats. 96% of those who supported Clinton in 2016 plan to support Biden in November. Overall, only 5% of Trump voters plan to switch, and only 4% of Clinton voters plan to switch. By the way, thinking about partisanship, in surveys, a lot of times you see that about our country is almost exactly 1/3 Democratic, 1/3 Republican, and then 1/3 independent. But that's not actually totally accurate. It turns out that a large number of independents claim that they're independent, but when you look at their voting behavior and look at the issues that they're interested in, many independents tend to lean one side or the other. They lean Democrat, lean Republican. And the leaners, the independents who are leaners, tend to behave almost identically to people who do identify with one of the parties. And so a Democratic leaning independent is basically behaving politically in the same way as someone who says that they're a Democrat. And so overall, about 49% of registered voters identify or lean Democratic, and 44% identify or lean Republican. Okay, here's our second big point here. This is about voter subgroups. They matter, okay? Groups matter, but don't forget the diversity of individual viewpoints too. In the 2016 and 2020 elections, several groups appear to be key players. First, racial differences in vote choice persist and grow. So number one, white voters lean Republican by 10 percentage points. This is about the same distribution as in the past 2 decades. Also, another trend not changing very much is that Black voters strongly lean Democratic. They do this by a 73% differential. What that means is that 83% of Black voters vote Democrat, 10% vote Republican. Again, this is about the same as usual. Hispanic voters and Asian American voters, though, we've seen an increase in the share of Democratic voters among those two groups. So right now, Hispanic voters lean Democratic by 32 points, and Asian American voters actually lean Democratic by 60 points. And so these trends are diverging. Now, here's the second point. Outside of race, we also have a difference between more educated voters and less educated voters. We're finding that increasingly less educated voters, those without college degrees or without some college classes, they tend to be shifting towards the Republicans. Those that do have college education tend to be shifting towards the Democratic Party. This is particularly strongest among those who have postgraduate educational experience. So higher level vocational degrees like law degrees, as well as master's degrees and PhDs, increasingly shifting to the Democrats, okay? The last big trend to watch out for is that deeply religious voters continue to diverge. White evangelical voters are about 61 points in favor of Republicans. That means that 78% of them are for Republicans and only 17% of them are for Democrats. There's also a shift happening in the Democratic Party. About 20 years ago, 75% of Democrats used to identify as Christians. That number of 75% has now reduced to about 50% in 2020. So the Republicans are getting more evangelical vote support, and the Democrats are increasingly less likely to identify as Christian. Now, here's the most important part about this, though. All of these race, education, and religious trends are not determinative. Individual diversity in vote choice is quite strong. And here's what I mean by that. 26% of Trump's support came from white Americans with college degrees. Here's some more. 12% of Trump's voters were Asian, Black, or Hispanic voters. On the flip side, about a quarter of Hillary Clinton's supporters were non-Hispanic white Americans without degrees. Finally, although Black voters heavily favor the Democratic Party, and they have done so for decades, and yet still 1 in 10 Black voters supported Trump in 2016, and about the same percent plans to support him in 2020. All right, here's the big third lesson here, Electoral College and You. So the Electoral College rules for the presidential race, but your vote still matters here in Illinois. The way our system works is that there isn't really one presidential race. There's actually 51 state contests. All of the states in the country, plus Washington, D.C., which is not a state but is given Electoral College votes. And most of these places are winner take all. So if you get 51% of the vote, you get 100% of the Electoral College votes. What this means is that some states are not competitive. In other words, it's very likely that one party's going to win it and very unlikely the other party's going to win it. What's Illinois like? Well, we think right now that Biden has about a 99% chance of winning Illinois. So does that mean you shouldn't vote? Does that mean your vote doesn't matter in Illinois? I want to make a couple arguments for why I think voting still matters even in Illinois. First, let's be serious here. 99% isn't 100%. There's still some unknown there. Second, if you really think about it, it's actually never rational to vote with the idea that because I'm going to vote because my one vote might matter, okay? The chances of your single vote actually being the determinative vote that breaks a tie is astronomically small, right? So there has to be other reasons why we vote and other reasons why it's a good idea to vote. It's not just, is my vote going to be the election winning vote? So here's 3 important things to think about in terms of your vote, even in Illinois, which is not competitive at the presidential level. First, when you vote, you signal to campaigns that a person like you is willing to come out and vote. This influences how much attention they're going to pay to you right now, but also in the future. They're going to pay attention to people like you and to you, and this is going to help you get your voice heard by these major parties. Second, by voting, you signal that voting itself is important and meaningful, and that if someone tried to take away your right to vote, it's much harder for them to make a case that they should take it away from you if you are actively exercising it at every available opportunity, okay? Third, the downstream candidates actually matter a great deal. And so just because Illinois itself is not very competitive at the presidential level, it may in fact be quite competitive at the state level and at the local level. Your vote can really matter in these downstream elections. And so if you want a Republican to win, or if you want Democrat to win, or if you want more conservative policies, or you want more liberal policies, your vote can really matter at the state level and the local level. All right. I hope this was interesting, and I'll catch you in the question and answer.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
All righty, thank you, Dane. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. Dane did a really good job of kind of setting us up for why voting is important. Now I'm going to kind of take the action step here. I'm going to walk you through how to register to vote. If you're already registered, we'll kind of chat about how to check that registration. And then we'll talk about, specifics for, whether or not you want to do a mail-in ballot, absentee, early vote. We'll kind of chat about what that needs to look like this election cycle. So if you can't see my screen, throw in the chat, but I'm going to assume that you can. So when we go to register for the first time, I always send people to this one website because it's very simple to manage. It's not a whole lot of blanks until you get to the next steps. So I will send a student to rockthevote.org, and all you need to do to start the process is to put in an email address that you're going to, of course, check. And then you're going to put in the zip code for whatever county it is you want to register in. For most of us, well, actually, I should say, instead of for most of us, for most students, you kind of have an option here. You could either register to vote here in Morgan County, which is where Jacksonville is located, because really you do have kind of an option here. You could choose to make your full-time address here on campus, since you do have a mailbox, or you could choose to register back in the county that you originally came from. One of the benefits for registering here in Morgan County is that for the most part, for most of your IC career, you will be here on campus during a November election. If you are not on campus, or if you are on campus and choose to register in your home county, all you need to do is just go to your county clerk and get an absentee ballot sent to you. But we'll go over that process as well. So whenever you put in your email address and zip code, this website will actually redirect you. Once you hit next step, it'll redirect you to whatever county it is you're registering in. So that'll kind of take you to the next step. If you're outside of, let's say, Illinois, it'll take you to whatever state you need to finish your registration in. This is also an important part of, making sure that all of the documentation you have is double checked and triple checked. So some of the information you'll need, of course, will be your social security number or permanent residency information. You're going to want your either birth certificate or driver's license. Usually there's more questions they'll ask as far as that. But this will really be the first step. And then once you get kind of through the Rock the Vote website, like I said, it'll redirect you, and that's where you'll punch in that next step of information. If you are already registered, you're going to want to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page here and click on this link here, Am I Registered to Vote? It will then kind of take you to this page, and you will put in the information that, and I should say, the information not that you want to use to register for the first time, especially if you're going to maybe change your registration to a different county. You're going to want to put in the information that you think you used to register for the first time. So chances are this was probably in whatever county you originally came from. Don't worry though. Don't worry though if you do get some of this information wrong. It will tell you. It's not going to just throw you out there on a hook and make you second guess everything. It will check this information and come back to you if there are errors. Another option, if you don't want to go through this, the county clerk's office is where all this information is kept. So if you know that, let's say you registered, maybe you're originally from Chicago, call up the county clerk's office in Cook County, and they can kind of walk you through and make sure that all this information is correct. Again, if you decide to change your registration for whatever reason, the county clerk's office is the first step in making that process happen. So now that we've kind of talked about how to, register the first time or check that registration, let's talk about specifics as far as this election. One of the things that I have been telling students over and over again, and we've seen this in some of the primary elections over the past few months, it's really difficult to know whether or not you're going to be healthy and able to go to the polls on a specific date. It's also hard to control the people that you're in contact with on a daily basis, whether or not they get sick, and thus you'll be put into maybe a 2-week quarantine. So what I've been telling students to do is just go on ahead and either apply for a mail-in ballot or take advantage of early voting in Illinois. But if you're going to go on ahead and apply for a mail-in ballot to be sent to you, you're going to go to the Illinois State Board of Elections website to do that. So all it is it's elections.il.gov, and you're going to go here to the first tab, and right in the middle of the page is voting by mail. So if you click on that, it will redirect you to this page, which of course gives you the next election, when the election is. It also has a nifty little, FAQ area. And you're going to scroll all the way to the bottom until you see the download for the Illinois application for vote by mail ballot. You'll pull that up. I'm guessing most of you are not a United States military service member and thus are overseas right now. So you're going to want this last option here, which is a regular vote by mail ballot. So you'll click on the second option and click agree. And once you get to this page, you will of course punch in your jurisdiction, which to show you guys, mine would be Morgan County here in Jacksonville. We'll click submit, and it will take you to the ballot application. So all you need to do, put in your information. This of course has to match up with whatever information you've given them when you register to vote. You will put all this information in, print this out, and then mail it back to this person right here. This will be the county clerk in whatever county you've registered in. This will be different if you're registered, let's say, in another county. But you'll mail this back, and usually within a couple weeks, they will check all this information and get a mail-in ballot sent to you. So it's a pretty simple process. Like I've told a lot of students, Illinois has also been doing mail-in voting for decades, so they know the process. It's a secure process, and for the most part, they have not found any major problems with the process they currently have. But to go on ahead and close out my time, what I have been telling students is if you are going to request a mail-in ballot, go ahead and do that now. Illinois is actually going to start mailing out, if you've sent them an application and they've approved it, they will start sending mail-in ballots out starting September 24th. So here in just a little over a week, or actually a week exactly. So I would suggest going ahead, if you're going to do that, get that in now, then you'll get your ballot. My suggestion is to go on ahead and get that filled out and sent in at least 2 weeks before the election on November 3rd, which would make it October 20th. That way, you know that your ballot got there ahead of time, and any errors or anything like that. That also gives the county clerk time to go back to your registration and say, I think you might have made a problem or an error here. Let me reach out to you and double check this. So it gives all parties involved here a little extra time to double check and make sure everything checks out. In a lot of communities, they're also utilizing ballot drop boxes. So for example, here in Morgan County, right outside the county clerk's office at the courthouse, there's a ballot drop box. This is a secure drop box that you can go and physically place your ballot in, and then they will automatically get it. That way, for example, if let's say it's late October and you're a couple days before the election and you're worried about the ballot getting there, you can go and physically take it to them. Lastly, Illinois also has this really great system of early voting. Early voting in Illinois is a no fault, no excuse option. So let's say if, for example, you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to go and vote in person on election day itself, you can actually start voting in person starting September 24th. And these are usually held at the county clerk's office. I would suggest going ahead and calling ahead to double check that they are offering it in your county. I know Morgan County is absolutely offering it, but yeah, give them a call, double check the hours, double check what documentation you need, and double check to make sure you're already registered. That way it's as simple as a few minutes to go in there and finish your ballot. But with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will turn it back over to Samantha to open up our Q&A session.
Thanks, Ryan. And thanks, Dane, too. Dane, you can pop back up on, or pop back in, all of the prepositions. Well, gosh, thank you both so much for sharing. I was taking notes during our conversation here. So I don't see, well, I saw plenty in the chat concerning some assignments for Dane's classes and some good discussion about Lincoln artifacts remaining in the museum gallery forever. But I don't see too many active questions at this time, but I'm excited that we have a small enough group, I think, where I can go ahead and enable a feature where I'm going to allow participants to unmute themselves. And this way, depending on your comfort level, students, you can ask a question in the chat for any of us, or if you want to utilize the raise hand feature, and you can audibly share your question then. Or we can just talk all good things Constitution Day and politics, and yeah. I did actually have a question for you, Dane. May I get the ball rolling?
Absolutely. Let's go. I was actually thinking, the answer to your question, of course, is that I think the bench would go right here.
That was not the nature of the line of questioning, but I'm glad that you've been thinking about this carefully. No, I was curious. So you mentioned in your presentation all about, voter trends and what different parties looked like 10, 20 years ago. And I was just curious if, in the political science and political psychology fields, if there's discussions of, in our current environment with COVID-19 and impacting maybe voter behavior, like what are some possibilities of what our voters will look like? That's a broad, big question.
No. That's a great question. Yeah. So there's a couple ways to kind of take the question. So one, so the first thing that right now that people are talking about seriously is what are going to be the immediate effects on COVID on voting for 2020. So folks have probably been reading a little bit about this, where we're thinking that people are going to vote through the mail much more often than in the past. And there's actually several really good reasons to increase to allow people to vote by mail. And one thing that I found really interesting is that when you look at the political science data on this, it turns out that allowing people to vote by mail does not seem to benefit one political party over the other. And I feel like when I'm listening to the news, that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that some Republicans are opposed to this idea and Democrats are in favor of it. And basically both sides are telling each other, you just like it because you're going to get more votes, or you just don't like it because you're going to get less. But actually we have data on this. We have papers that have been written that have studied this, and it actually it just in general helps people vote regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. So that's kind of interesting. And also kind of like in the way that we think about how much COVID has affected teaching, and how some of this remote stuff probably is going to be incorporated into teaching practices at the elementary school, middle school, high school, and maybe even college level. We're also wondering, to what extent does our remote sort of situation affect our politics too, and affect the specifically the institutions. And so, for example, right now there are a lot of members of Congress that are taking advantage of having these quick pop-ins on video, because no matter where they are, they can meet with pretty large groups of voters on like the drop of a hat, and for like half hour they can like bounce in, and then boom, now they're back in Washington, D.C. Whereas meeting with those constituents in the past would have required literally a plane flight home. And then there's all kinds of logistical issues there. So that's another way. We're wondering if maybe politicians will actually become more comfortable with digital media as well. Yeah, so there's probably more, but yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Well, and now I want to go research the history of mail-in voting, but I might be showing my colors a bit here. But thanks, Dane. And I see oh, go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Just to add to what Dane said, one of the things that I keep hearing about mail-in voting is that it will somehow increase voter fraud. But as I was preparing for this presentation, one of the interesting stats that I found was that since the year 2000 in Illinois, so about 20 years, we've actually only found about 40 cases of voter fraud in a state that, for decades has also done mail-in voting. And that stat is also coming from the Heritage Foundation, which is a more conservative leaning think tank. So, I'll be curious to, go back to 2020 and some of the research that political scientists are doing for years to come and see if some of those, concerns are actually founded upon anything.
Yeah, 40 doesn't seem like a lot. I mean, it's not good. It's not ideal. Should not happen. But I'm like, oh. Okay.
And so one thing interesting about voter fraud is that our efforts to try to reduce voter fraud have several problems, right? And so Ryan's on the first one, which is it's very, very hard to find people who are trying to fraudulently vote, okay? And there are groups of people who are attempting to vote not realizing that they're not registered, or that they actually, sometimes people mistakenly vote twice because they do a mail-in ballot and then forget that they did that. But the innocent mistakes actually get caught right away. And so the actual number of people who have basically like fraudulently created fake identities to vote in the modern era, this is like vanishingly small to find. Ryan mentions a figure of 40. I've seen some data that suggests that there's only been like 3 people who have ever even been prosecuted for voter fraud. Again, in the modern era, voter fraud like built the city of Chicago several decades ago. So like we should be clear about this, that like historically voter fraud is a thing. That is a real thing. But in the modern era, with the way we can keep information, the way we can keep records on people, it's just very hard to do it. And then the other thing is, like, think about this. Like, I just find this common sense. Like, people really just want to have their voice heard about politics, and they're not trying to cheat anybody. They just want to go out there, make their voice heard, and they're voting not even because they think they're going to swing the election one way or the other. They're doing it just because it's part of their civic duty. And like a huge number of people, that's the way they feel. That's how it's built in. And so one other problem with sort of these anti-voter fraud techniques is that it's sometimes we have some data that suggests that the efforts to reduce fraud have the problem of stopping people who should be able to vote from actually being able to vote. And so, like, here's the calculus here. It's like there are a bunch of people. There are some people who are voting that should not be voting, and so we're going to stop that, and we're going to stop those 40 fraudulent votes. But a policy like that could actually cause something like 5,000 or 10,000 people to suddenly have serious barriers to being able to vote, and then you could, it's like, is it worth trading? Let's just say, it's the most corrupt state in the world and in the United States, and there's 40 fraudulent voters all in one place. It's like, what's worse, letting the 40 vote or denying 5,000 to 10,000 people the right to vote and trade off? So we always, in social science, this is for my economics people out there, we need to think really seriously about what the trade-offs are. We can't just shoot at perfection. We've got to see what exactly are we trading off here. I just noticed there's some questions from the chat. Should we dive into those too?
Yeah, I did have a quick, this is the historian, public history person. When you say modern era of voting, what do you mean by that? Is that the last 50 years? Like what?
Yeah.
What is modern for you?
Yes, this is the disciplinary difference, right?
Yeah.
It's like for some historians, it's like cars were invented in the modern era. And in politics, the modern era is like, 3 months ago. That's how fast okay. So modern era, I'm just thinking about, say starting the year 2000, where we start to have a big a big increase in the use of the internet for politics in particular. So, but there's no clear cutoff for modern and pre-modern.
I'm glad you told me that you define it as 2000. That helps me process your thinking. So I do see another question, and I think this is up your alley, Dane.
Okay.
Our registrar, Helen, asks, what would it take to change the Electoral College process from winner take all?
Okay, so we would need to amend the Constitution for this to happen. And so there are 2 methods to amend the Constitution. One way is to have the members of Congress actually vote on constitutional amendments. That is the only way we have ever used to approve amendments to the Constitution. The second way that I'm about to describe to you has actually never been done before, but it is an option. The second way to do it would be to have basically what we call state conventions, where basically the states circumvent the national Congress, the U.S. Congress, and instead the states themselves have these conventions where they get together and then basically pass proposals that can amend the Constitution. There are serious challenges to getting rid of the Electoral College. One is that, unlike what I was saying in terms of increasing mailing voting will help both parties equally. There's really no advantage one way or the other, at least in what I've read. Unfortunately, by getting rid of the Electoral College, this will actually very specifically disadvantage the Republican Party in the short term. Now, in the long term, all parties want to do is parties want to win. And so parties will figure out how to win no matter what the rules are. But in the short term, this would be devastating to Republican politics at the national level, at the presidential level. And so any kind of movement to change the Electoral College would be interpreted as a kind of political attack or a political coup. And so that's a very serious challenge, because people would feel like you're basically trying to change the rules so Republicans will lose. There is one more idea that has been proposed. There's actually, this is interesting. I was reading about this recently. So you might be able to do it without amending the Constitution by basically, every state is allowed to essentially make their own rules for how they will divvy out their Electoral College votes. And there was a discussion, in fact, it's still ongoing, and Illinois plays a role in this, that there was this idea, what if we get a whole bunch of states together and all the states basically pledge that no matter what their individual state voters decide, they will give the Electoral College votes to whichever candidate has the biggest national popular vote total. Okay, so let me say that one more time. So like, say in Illinois, let's just pretend that Republicans won the state of Illinois for a second. Okay, if this proposal or if this agreement was in place, the Republican candidate would win the Electoral College of Illinois under the normal system. But in this compact, what would happen is the state would say, listen, I know the Republican won our state, but the national popular vote winner was actually the Democrat. And so what we're doing, because we're a part of this group and all the states have agreed to do this, we're actually going to throw our votes to the Democrat. And that would be legal. That would be permitted under the Constitution. It just requires all the states to coordinate in a way that they probably would not want to do that right now. This won't surprise anyone. To the best of my understanding, this compact or this agreement, it actually exists. The name of it is slipping my mind right now. The only states that have signed on to this compact, that have signed on to agree, are states that are traditionally Democratic-leaning states. And so no Republican state has, to my knowledge, no Republican state has agreed to do that. So what would it take to change the Electoral College process? A lot. Apparently in the 1970s, apparently we were a couple votes away from actually getting rid of the Electoral College. That was the last opportunity we had to make that happen. I won't get into it now, but my 101 students learn, and we discuss this. We talk about there are advantages to having the Electoral College system too. It doesn't always feel that way, especially if you're a Democrat, but there's a kind of genius to the American system that's worth looking at. Yes, Emily Adams is exactly right. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That is exactly what it's called.
So I see we're at about 7:53, and I saw a couple other questions come up. Here's one from Aurora, and this I think would be right up your alley, Ryan, and right up your alley again, Dane. So what advice would you give to first-time voters? And Aurora notes that some people may feel as if they are not educated enough in politics, or the people running for office to vote, like maybe to have a little bit more knowledge and to go into that prepared. Any advice?
I mean, I would say that the fact that you are asking that question, asking whether or not you're educated enough, is probably a deeper question than a lot of voters are asking of themselves. So I wouldn't be worried about whether or not you're educated enough. I would say, once you ask that question, at the very least, go look at the candidates. Go look at, I know some states have, propositions and other questions on the ballot. Go do some basic level reading on that. There's a lot of information out there. So once you know that you need to find some more information, start digging. And I know that, being in academia, there's a lot of us that are very well versed in trying to find that information if that's something you need help with. But Dane, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so Aurora, this is an awesome question, because what's embedded in this question is an understanding that, like, the right to vote and the choice to vote is a solemn duty that people should take seriously. And so the fact that you're asking a question like that demonstrates that you see the value of voting, because otherwise, who cares how informed people are? Just go out there and vote, like, it doesn't matter. You're saying, well, no, it does matter. So what do you do? Okay, so Aurora, I have a couple responses to this. So one, I think the threshold for what your knowledge needs to be in order to make an accurate decision, I think the threshold is actually quite low. And so to be like totally serious with you, I think, like, if you Google searched the two options for about 10 minutes on one side, 10 minutes on the other, I actually think you would be above average in knowledge about those candidates. Like, I really do. I think that would be I think you'd be able to understand, who is, which candidate has policies that you embrace, and which candidate seems to have sort of the personal character or background characteristics that you think are important. The other thing, Aurora, I got to say, I'm reminded of a recent, it was a congressional hearing, and it was these politicians, people in the Senate and the House. They were inviting these giant tech CEOs to come testify in front of Congress. Okay, Aurora, I just have to tell you, these guys, these politicians, they were asking, like, the leader of Facebook, the leader of Google, they were asking them questions about their business to see how, big tech is hurting us or helping us. Okay, Aurora, some of these dudes don't know how to use a computer, and they're trying to ask like the leader of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, they're trying to, like, ask him questions, and they, like, don't know what a Google is. If they can be our representatives, I think you can vote.
So I love that, because I remember that example in the news, Dane. Thank you for bringing that up. So, like, just as a question, if someone wanted to, do some digging, but also make sure that the sources they were looking up for individuals running for office were, unbiased sources, where might they find some of those unbiased sources? And then attached to that, if someone wanted to, like, so, maybe individuals are familiar with major, elections, but on more local or regional levels, is there a way for individuals to find out more about, like, who's on the ballot before they're, like, actually voting? Like, could either of you speak to the sources, and then also maybe just finding out more about what they're voting on in general?
You want to start that, Ryan?
I feel like it's such a tricky subject nowadays, because, what one person thinks is non-biased, another person will see as biased. One of the things, at least as one of the things that I do as a voter, though, is, I first and foremost will go look at what media, what are the candidates themselves, how are they describing themselves, whether it's, through their website, some of the information they're sending out, what do they think a voter needs to know about them? And then I'll take that information and start fact checking that in Google, and, try to get an assessment of, this candidate says that they are, pro Second Amendment. Well, what nationally are academics and other things saying about the Second Amendment currently? So I rely on, what are the candidates trying to inform me about? Dane, you also throw in All Sides. I was going to mention that as well. That's a really good website. I will also utilize, stuff like Snopes and, websites like that are very quick to fact check information as it's coming out. I think this is also a good opportunity for me to plug that myself and Alora Agston out of the Shui Library are doing a combo later this month on how to do online fact checking and information literacy. So we can also give you tools to do some of this digging. So Dane, I'll pass it off to you.
So I'm gonna hijack this a little bit because I see an awesome question from Rachel from a couple minutes ago, and I think Ryan said exactly what we need to say on that last question. Rachel asks, "What about election hacking, like Russia interfering? What can voters do to prevent nationwide fraud?" So Rachel, I believe this really strongly. Okay, the way to stop tampering in our system is to, one, don't let them make you disenfranchised about voting. Okay, that's what they're trying to do. They don't want you to vote. They want you to think your vote's useless. They want you to think your voice doesn't matter. And so if you look at that and say, well, they're just hacking everything anyway, what's the even point? Okay, like that's how they win. So the first thing is you still vote. That's the first thing. You still get out there, you still vote. The second thing is you need to look at your political leaders, okay, and you need to find ones that you feel like are making honest attempts to try and stop this kind of interference. I see politicians on both sides of the aisle that are worried about this, okay? So I'm not telling you to run to Democrats or run to Republicans. I'm just saying take seriously what your leaders are saying and find the ones that care about this stuff. And those are the ones that you should support.
That's a good question. I'm glad you brought it up, Rachel, and I'm glad you saw it and then got to it right away, Dane. And it is 8 o'clock, and I did see one more question come in. So I do want to be respectful and mindful of our time, but I think we can sneak in this last question from Casey here. So do you think that there's a likelihood that we'll ever see a new party option, a new major party option perhaps, arise aside from the Democratic and Republican parties? And Dane, I think this question's for you.
Yeah, so this is fascinating, and let's see if I can do a 60-second answer because I got like 50 minutes in me on this. My students know this. Don't worry, guys, it's cool. We'll be all right. Here's the deal: the way our system works, we own our ocean only can fit 2 fish at one time. Okay. And so what happens is every time a third fish tries to join, okay, the 2 big fish find a way to make that third group not relevant. And often they do this by recognizing, hey, this third group has some good ideas. We're going to take those ideas. And so that's how you get changes in Democratic and Republican policy from the introduction of good ideas, sometimes from third parties, okay? But the reason why third parties can't exist is because the only way you have any political power in the United States is if you can outright win an election. And so you have to be able to get a plurality of the vote. And so a party that only gets 10% is never going to get any political power, which means the party is going to essentially suffocate, okay? Now, you can get a new party to arrive that consumes the old part. I don't know why I'm using such violent fish feeding metaphors. I'm rolling with it. You can get a third party to emerge that basically consumes or takes the place of one of the big parties. That is possible, but otherwise we're in a 2-party system for the time being.
So if you vote for a third party, Dane, question in the chat, is it throwing away your vote? Is it throwing away your voice in this discussion?
So I'm actually not sure how to answer that because voting for the person or the policy that you believe in can't ever be considered throwing away your vote. But at the same time, it is true that casting a vote for a third party is unlikely to have any measurable effect on a political on an outcome. And so basically strategically you're making a huge mistake. Your voice is not going to actually impact that particular election. But in terms of expressing your political values, it can be really important for you to tell the world, hey, I'm a libertarian or a Green Party and that matters to me. So yeah, that's tricky to answer.
Oh, gosh, I feel like we've had some really good discussion here with all of these,
we have
these questions.
We have some libertarians in the chat, so I salute you all. Yes.
Well,
good work.
And I know I've kind of, learned from both of you and just kind of like seen these resources and kind of thought about some of these questions in a different way. So thank you both, Dane and Ryan. I think most of our students on the chat here know how to get a hold of us, but if anyone has any other questions for any of us tonight, you can go ahead and, I guess, email or follow up. Yeah, but gosh, I think that might be concluding our program. What do you guys think? Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much to all the students out there. We really appreciate you all coming out here. Thanks so much. I know you guys have a really tough week ahead of you. It means a lot to me that you all came out to spend this hour with us. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome.
Thanks, everyone, and please take care.
All right.